Hey everyone, it's Mindrolling, and I am Raghu, and I am back with something somewhat unusual. Usually it's a one-on-one, but today I have Paul Condon and John Makransky together. Welcome, gentlemen, to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So they put together something really useful, which is what Mindrolling, you guys, this is what it's all about. Giving us all a chance to apply practice and perspective, starting with perspective, to our daily lives using some of the great vehicles from, particularly, obviously, from the East, but not just the East, from all mystical traditions. And so they have something called How Compassion Works, that they both put together, and it has aside from having wonderful philosophical perspectives, it also has some practical meditative practices that one can follow. But anyhow, how did you guys get together? How did this all happen?
Well, let's see. Paul and I first met at Mind and Life Institute, Right. Research Institute. Wasn't that right? Was that 2004, Paul, or something?
Yeah, it was around then, early 2010s.
And then you could say something about that, but then what followed that was you're showing up at retreats I was teaching and coming to conversation. Do you want to say anything about the Summer Research Institute meeting?
Yeah. So John and I were both at that meeting at the Garrison Institute in New York.
Oh, yeah.
And before then, at the time, I had been doing some work with Lama Willa Baker and another meditation practitioner named Bob Morrison. And through both Lama Willa and Bob, I had heard of John Makransky's work. So I was a little bit aware of it at the time. And then John and I crossed paths at the Summer Research Institute through Mind and Life. And John presented some ideas around what he was calling the benefactor practice, calling to mind people or moments in our life that are felt as a kind of source of care or source of joy. And that really struck a chord with me in terms of its connections with attachment theory, which is a big theme in the book. And so then John and I had a meal together at that conference, and then we just kind of clicked in terms of like mutual interests around the intersections of psychology and Tibetan contemplative practice, and then stayed in touch. And then after I finished my PhD, I was looking for some chances to do some retreats with John, and then things kind of picked up from there.
Wow. Okay, let's go back a little bit, though. Like, how did you even get interested in anything outside of what we were being fed when we were very young into our teen years? What are the things that made a difference to realize, wow, there really is a path to happiness? Just plain old starting there, because for me that was a big deal. I mean, I was really unhappy, teenager, and didn't get it all. I say this all the time. Thanks to Bob Dylan, I realized, okay, I'm not the only one out there. And that was a big thing. And music was a big thing for me, so it helped start my transformation, so to speak. Yeah. What about you guys?
For me, I think the angst of my teen years was also helpful, like you're describing. Actually, it was a very good thing, because I felt like even though I grew up in a setting where we had enough to eat, we had whatever we needed, basically, and I had opportunity for pretty good education, but most of my time was very unhappy. Other kids my age were making each other unhappy. It's like we didn't have anything better to do than torment each other, and then also teenagers. And then the adults seemed also to be very unhappy and have a certain air of desperation beyond what anyone would admit. And that's why I got really interested in, can't we do better than this? Is it possible is there something about human beings and what's available to them that they could access from their mind or something? So I started to get really interested in psychology in middle school and high school, and was reading a lot of psychology as best I could at that age. And then in college, I started majoring in that direction, mainly focusing on brain biochemistry, because I thought maybe that would be the secret to what's possible for humans in terms of becoming more stable, grounded in well-being, rather than so much desperation and hiding from our desperation that we're having. But then in college, as I was taking more and more courses in both hard science and also psychology, and then I started taking courses in other models of the human mind, that took me into Asian philosophy. And as soon as I was introduced to Buddhist thought and understandings of practice in college, that completely caught me. It felt like, this is what I was looking for. It's over. Like, I'm not searching anymore. It's in Buddhism, at least for me. The teachings about layers of suffering, much of which we're not even conscious of, the unconscious driving forces of those layers of suffering, inner causes of suffering, and the fact that there's a tremendous human potential that from beyond all that suffering, or prior to all the causes of that suffering, that we could begin to access with proper practice. Those were messages that completely caught me, and I decided after college I'd have to get to Asia. So going into Peace Corps helped me do that. And then after that, I ended up looking for and meeting Buddhist teachers and communities in Asia.
Yeah, well, there's a couple that I want to talk to you about. But Paul, what about you?
Yeah. So for me, it really started to take hold when I was in college as an undergraduate student, so around maybe 19 or 20 years old. And I was majoring in psychology. I was interested in some of the perspectives on human nature and philosophy of mind that made their way into psychology. But I eventually took a course with a professor who happened to be a Zen practitioner, as well as a pretty influential theorist in attachment theory. So he had a really interesting profile of intellectual perspectives and experience, and he really brought those kind of intersecting worlds into that class. It was called the Psychology of Transcendence. Okay. And that was one of my favorite classes, and we did some basic sitting practice. Nothing too, in terms of the conceptual presentation, too complicated. It was basically just sitting and maybe watching a candle or sitting and breathing for 10 minutes. But there was immediately, I felt some real peace with that way of being, and the emphasis on compassion within these intersecting worlds of psychology and Buddhism as a kind of value that could lead to happiness. That really inspired me as a topic that would be worth exploring some more and studying, both from a psychological point of view as well as a Buddhist point of view. And I was exploring some of the readings, some of the writings of the Dalai Lama, and some of the work that he had been doing with psychiatrists and psychologists. So there were these various threads that inspired me to pursue those ideas further. And then I moved to Boston to do a PhD in social psychology. And even at that time, I was doing a lot of research from a sort of purely scientific perspective of testing hypotheses and ideas related to compassion. But still, I wanted to learn more experientially about all of this. And I started practicing pretty regularly at the Cambridge Zen Center, doing a lot of Zen practice and Zen retreats. And I loved that. But still, I wanted to learn more about the Tibetan perspective, having some awareness that the Tibetan perspective was really thematizing compassion more so. And then that kind of led me down the trail of, pursuing different kinds of study and practice.
Yeah. This, everybody out there, this is a very comprehensive book, and it goes pretty deep into some of the concepts. And you guys did something really great. And I have to tell you, John, when you said, okay, you got to a certain point and you knew this was it, this is what you were just absolutely absorbed by, comforted by, curiosity was piqued, all of it. This same thing happened to me, and with when I met Ram Dass, all those years ago. And eventually with Neem Karoli Baba, maybe within a year, I guess I met him, something like that, of meeting Ram Dass. And I just look at this, the Tibetan, let me just preface this a little bit, because you might think, and the audience knows through different podcasts, but I thought it'd be informative to let you know that, yes, we went to India. I went when Ram Dass went back the second time. Yes, we met Neem Karoli Baba. Yes, supposedly a Hindu saint, quote unquote. And we were very naive and very young. And how this happened for us is like still unfathomable. But one day, I don't know if you know who Krishna Das is.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So he and I went to see Neem Karoli Baba one day. And it's a complex story, and I won't get too far into it. I've told it before. But the main point is Krishna Das had just a scrapbook that he kept putting things into, diary. And Maharaji, we called him that, opened the book to one page that had these beautiful Buddhist, several paragraphs of, just incredible Mahamudra, maybe it was from, So Maharaji turned to the translator and said, tell me what this says. And he did. And then Neem Karoli Baba Maharaji went, Teek, yep, right on. And then he turned the page, and Krishna Das had put a big picture of Neem Karoli Baba in it, and he said to us, who's that? And, we thought you're jiving us. Yeah, who's that? It's you. Nay, Buddha. So I don't know how many decades it took to realize what he was really saying to us, but our whole group spent a lot of time, particularly with Tibetan Buddhist teaching, starting with Vipassana meditation that we did with Goenka in India at the time. But that became very much a part of our legacy, our tradition was, and you speak to it here in the book, love and wisdom, right? And the importance of that balance and being there. So that's what this legacy from him, that's what it really represents. So it's although back in the day, we used to go see Trungpa Rinpoche, and he would call us the Love and Lighters. Ram Dass and the Love and Lighters are here. And I'm sure I don't know, you've heard, just kind of the stuff that went on, and especially this was at Tail of the Tiger in Vermont at that time. So that's why what you guys have put together has so much in it that is very connected to my experience with Dharma, and it is this. So I think it'd be great to just talk about a couple of the things here. One of the things that really spoke to me really felt like it had something to do with what's going on in our world right now. And it's a very difficult world that we're living in. So I think it would be great to just talk about, we're doing a book, not to digress, with Ram Dass' first posthumous book, and it's called There Is No Other. And I just think that you've really contextualized that in a couple of different ways in this book. And I just want to refer to it, so I'm looking for the pages that I read that really spoke to that concept. Okay, here it is. Genuine compassion does not involve condoning destructive behaviors, policies, or systems. It confronts what is destructive in persons in order to uphold and confirm their fuller humanity and potential. This wisdom of compassion distinguishes between a person's harmful behaviors and the person, confronting the person's behaviors on behalf of the person. This is so great. I'll tell you why. Because Ram Dass, I was in, years ago before he died, I was with him in his house, and he had a picture of Trump on his altar. Oh, wow, you're putting I said, geez, I don't know if I could do that, And he said, I recognize the tough, what he called it was the tough incarnation of this human being. But who he is, he'd say soul, we always went back and forth about it, soul or true self. I am speaking to that within this entity, which is exactly what you just said. This is what we need to do, right? Distinguish between a person's harmful behaviors and the person. So I really, why don't you guys speak to that, which is so much integral to what people need to hear on both sides of the equation.
Yeah, that's it. Kind of what you're picking out, I think, is coming in one of the later chapters of the book, and it flows out of all the kind of fundamental ideas and ways of practicing that we introduced in the book. And importantly, every chapter has a number of meditation practices to help make it concrete and experiential, not just theoretical. But the basic idea is related to the passage that you quoted, is that in order to really be the kind of person that can make a beneficial difference in our world, to really become that kind of person, we have to learn how to drop down below the superficial reactive level of consciousness that we all tend to live on together, and drop below that into more of the depth of our being, more into the ground of our experience. That's what we basically need to learn. And the entire book is sorting out the ways that passed down through Tibetan Buddhism, but are the basic understandings and pattern of practice, I think, are shared in many traditions, just as you were quoting from Ram Dass and Karoli Baba, but also many other traditions. But the basic idea is that we can actually learn to become more receptive to many positive qualities from the depth of our being. And with the help of those qualities, we can learn to reunify more and more with that depth of our being. And then from that depth of being, we can then see others and relate to others more in the depth of their being. And that's what Ram Dass, I think, was referring to. Yeah. That is, not to just get fooled by the reactive habits of our own mind that reduce other people and also ourselves to very limited images of them, then mistake those limited images of them that our own minds construct as them. We can drop down into a more grounded depth of our awareness, we can really learn that. And from that depth, we can actually sense that same depth in others. And we can start to sense it in them, see it in them, speak to that in them, not to their head, but to their being. But we can only do that from our being. So that requires a learning of a kind of practice discipline. But I think this is the deep dimension of what many spiritual traditions are transmitting, actually, this as a real possibility. So then we're not mainly sorting out the principles that you summarized just by thinking hard about them. We're actually dropping into more of a depth of our being through which we actually sense more of the depth in others, and then we can respond to that. But we can't do that unless we drop into the depth of our being. We can't do it by just believing. That would be a nicer way to relate to others. And that means becoming aware both, to finish this thought, becoming aware of two things together that Ram Dass raised up, the reactive habits of our own mind that we've been so caught up in, much more than we've been conscious, number one. And then number two, a depth dimension to us in the ground of our experience. You refer to that as true self, it's fine. A depth dimension, which is the depth of the person. So now we have both those things that we're becoming more conscious of, the superficial reactive level of our consciousness that our mind has tended to identify with, along with everyone around us. We're conditioning each other to do that by our reactions. More and more conscious of that in myself. That's the point I'm trying to make here. Not just in others, not just in the Trumps, but in myself, and also the further depth to me. Then from there, I can recognize that in others rather than just judging them from a fake on high perspective. It's not real. So I can sense them more in their depth and also in how they get all caught up. I can do that to the degree that I've knowing that in myself, both of those.
There you go. That's it right there. Paul, any thoughts?
Yeah. So, I mean, one way that John and I have carried this project out is then sort of coming in and adding in some psychological and scientific perspectives that add another layer of interpretation to the kinds of things that John was just describing. So in a lot of different areas of psychology, psychological science, there's perspectives that compassion and cooperative abilities are natural capacities that we come into the world with through evolution, that it's part of our architecture, so to speak. And throughout the course of our lifespan, then social conditioning comes in and in some ways can inhibit those capacities. We learn various strategies or have various experiences that interfere with those natural capacities for care and cooperation and empathy. And so to some extent, care is a natural capacity, and being in a caring relationship and caring connection with another being is more natural and less effortful than being in an antagonistic or conflict-based connection. So a lot of the practices, meditation practices that are presented in the book are helping us to become aware of those conditioned patterns and not be so longer identified with them, so that those natural capacities for care can come forth more fully. And we can then resonate with others in that more natural way of being, as John was describing. Another piece of that I've found really fascinating that corresponds with the book is that one of the unique things about the human species is that, compared with other animal species, is that we don't just depend on one primary caregiver. As humans, we are supported by a variety of caregivers, multiple parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, siblings. And so we have this unique ability and capacity to maintain connection with multiple caregivers. That's something that we need as humans in order to survive. So it's our nature to be in connection with multiple beings. And this is something I think that deeply connects with the perspective that John just described, in which there's a kind of synergy between the evolutionary and Tibetan perspectives.
We should also say caregivers. We're not talking about people that are in nursing homes that need care. We're talking about us humans.
Yes.
That absolutely need love, compassion, kindness, and caring. I love this little section. Although we are all subject to this socially conditioned reaction to harm, it feeds the underlying causality of harm by assuming in any context that some are worthy of care and others are not. I mean, this is the kernel of the whole thing that's going on right now in big caps. To assume that and to act on it is to harm. It is the assumption operative in all of us when we become the ones who harm whoever we perceive as unworthy of any care. I mean, this just happened to me the other day. We did a big benefit with Krishnadas in New York for Love Serve Remember Foundation. So I saw many of my old friends and mentioned this book that I had mentioned to you, There Is No Other, coming out here in October. And I, talked about, the transforming out of the polarization of us inside ourselves. We are polarized, never mind outside, but in both cases. And it was like, I get that. And yeah, but they should still hang that MF. And it wasn't even him. It was, they were so absolutely engrossed in this divide. I mean, people that have been practicing for a long time. And I thought, wow, this is really, which is one of the reasons I thought, a little bit more compassion is needed here. Amongst our so-called, we're the wide open part of the population, that wants to support people in pain and so on. It's unbelievable, actually.
That's actually a major target of this book, How Compassion Works. A step-by-step guide is the fuller title, but that was a big part of the target of it, is that, at least in my experience over the last maybe almost 50 years, like you, Raghu, in my own experience, as well as observing others around me, many of us were really trying to become more spiritual people, in the sense of actually being able to, actually embodying ideals of kindness and seeing others more deeply, and not being superficially judgmental, more in touch with more of the fullness of everyone involved in a situation. So I think that many of us were trying really hard to learn practices to help us really become that. And I think that many of us actually thought we were becoming that ideal much more than we actually were. That is actually my own experience of my own trajectory.
Yeah.
That is my own looking back on multiple times when I came to a new recognition that I thought that I had caught on, but I had not caught on to the depth of these practice traditions to the degree that I had thought, not even close yet. Mm. And part of what I think foundationally, what supports the possibility of further deepening, of not just getting discouraged once we see that, but realizing that to see our own fallibilities, which were previously not conscious to us, is showing us more of what we're all going through here together, is showing us more of what others are also caught up in that I may have been judging without even knowing I was judging, and also showing us more of how much insight further can come to recognize the potential here to draw on deeper powers or greater powers of our innate goodness, and to actually learn how to do that. But what's foundationally supportive for that, I think, is actually necessary, is to have exemplars of that, models of that, those who embody profound ways of being, deeply grounded, deeply respectful, deeply seeing others from a depth of themselves. There need to be people like that in the world, and other people then who are receptive to what they're embodying can then begin to catch on. Like we all are kind of seeking more of the positive qualities of our being, but we don't know how to become more receptive to them and embody them better. But those who have learned significantly, nobody's perfect, I don't think, but whoever has learned significantly to do that, you name several, right? With Neem Karoli Baba is renowned for that. Just by the power of his being, from stories I've heard about him from others, as an example, but many people would say this about other figures in other religious traditions, and certainly in Buddhism. It's almost like just from having become so transparent to the positive power of his being, it is resonating with the same capacity in us that has not been actualized to that extent. It's communicating with us before he even speaks, taking him as an example. And therefore, it's already beginning to evoke our innate underlying capacity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that actually, I think, is the beginning of the path in the entire history of spiritual traditions.
Yeah.
Passed down through story, through image, through art, through meeting significant figures. But we need them. And that starts also to relate to what Paul was referring to as attachment theory, that in order to mature, according to attachment theory in a very simple way, in order to mature into a kind of human being who can really deeply see and respect, appreciate, and have reverence for others and hold them in love and care, we need to have experienced what it's like to be deeply seen and held in love and care. That's kind of the structure of attachment theory in psychology, but that, I would say, is the deep structure of traditions, and that is the core of what we were trying to communicate in this book, how compassion works, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, actually how to catch on to that from within our own worldviews, within our own location, within our own history, to begin to notice, there have been embodiments of positive powers of being that I can start to draw on. I've encountered some of that even in little moments of caring connection, let alone meeting some great saint. We don't have to have all met great saints, but that it's pervading our life in ways we can pay new attention to, and it can start to bless us and empower us to open to more of the hidden capacity in our own being.
I'll tell you, though, that great saint is I don't mean the localized Neem Karoli Baba, but those, I met 16th Karmapa, and when I got near him, I thought, oh my God, this is the same as Neem Karoli Baba, just the kind of spaciousness and non-polarity, et cetera, happen. So there's only one of that. The rest of it is just manifestation of humans with interacting, as you just said, with somebody who is radiating, and we just absolutely absorb that radiation. And now when we meet, which we do a lot, under the auspices of what was created with Ram Dass here in the way, and particularly in America, we meet. Thich Nhat Hanh said the coming Maitreya Buddha is the Sangha. And that happens. So when you're speaking to this to me is one of the most important things, practice-wise, is to actually be intentional and be with people who are expressing that same intention.
We've also met Paul and I both, and it's in the background of our book. We've both met a lot of people who would say, "Well, I've never met a saint. And I can't really relate to that. And also, I don't even believe in saints. And that all sounds nice. But Paul and I, and gosh, I've been teaching retreats for 25 years, so I've met all that so much. And then the question becomes, well, what do you have in your life world and in your whole life history that connects you to what we're talking about? And I think everybody actually does, that these innate underlying positive powers or powers of goodness, this capacity that Paul referred to, this inner human inclination for connection, care, resonance, warmth, which is actually our strongest innate inclination, then both according to spiritual traditions like Tibetan Buddhism, but also according to parts of evolutionary theory, that has been manifesting in littler ways or bigger ways in our world and throughout our lives. And part of our mission is actually to point it out more and more so people begin to realize that they have been receiving a kind of a transmission of the power of love, compassion, deeper seeing, and wisdom already throughout their whole lives in many little moments or bigger moments that they may not have noticed yet. And we can help point it out, and they can notice. At least that's been our experience with many people.
Of course, there is psychedelics as well.
That
has been very influential, especially way back when. And now, actually, I'm going to MAPS next week, which is the multidisciplinary organization around psychedelics that's getting it legal, trying to get it legalized, although they had a roadblock last year. And what we're going to be talking about is the efficacy of psychedelics if they're involved completely with integration. Actually, I just heard a beautiful thing today as we were planning for this. The real medicine starts when the journey's over. That people this is what Ram Dass represented, but it is a way to have that insight that you're speaking to by virtue of the practice, by virtue of meeting teachers. You know, I looked through the book, your book, and then I got to a place where you were just acknowledging teachers. And you were acknowledging Tsoknyi Rinpoche and Choki Nyima, right? I very well know who these teachers are, and particularly for me, Tsoknyi has been a great teacher, although I have not physically met him in person. And I have many of my friends like Danny Goldman and people like that who are very close to him and so on. But that was a connection for me to you all because of my connection with this being. And it actually, it came through a book that he did, How to Meditate with Danny Goldman. Just phenomenal stuff in that book. So that is as powerful and as deeply connective as anything that anyone can experience easily. And I'd say that people shouldn't take that, lightly, that we have this opportunity for these kinds of beings, and which are expressed throughout this book, that what they represent and what we can absolutely use to change, to the very core of our being, which is necessary when we're speaking to being able to not condemn and judge. And again, that, this is very, to me, this is so important, in this day and age, right? With what is happening. It is really, we're in a very critical moment in terms of what is going on. Another great thing that's in the book, it's the way that you describe the 3 levels of suffering from the Buddha. it'd be great. We don't have that much time left, and it's a huge subject. But yeah, maybe Paul, you can just describe those, because give people an idea of what it is. They're very different, yet they have this intrinsic underlying reality that we deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, one of the concepts, I want to start with a concept from psychology that I found really helpful that's referenced throughout the book a lot, and then relates to the 3 levels of suffering. So there's this term called granularity. And granularity was first introduced in the psychology literature to describe ways that people use different words to understand their emotional experience. So some people will have a low level of granularity, meaning they'll use words like I feel bad, don't feel very good, kind of low differentiation of emotional states. Whereas some people have high levels of granularity, meaning they'll use much more precise and differentiated terms to refer to their experience. So states like I'm feeling frustrated, annoyed, irritated, upset, angry, sad, depressed. Like these are all referring to different kinds of states. And in the psychology research, having this ability to differentiate emotions is a kind of emotional intelligence that corresponds with a lot of benefits in terms of better regulation of our own emotions, better decision making, more empathy for others, being able to understand others' emotional states. And so that's purely a psychological kind of way of thinking about it. But in the work that John and I have been doing and the practices that we've been exploring together, it became apparent that this kind of thinking maps into Buddhism in a lot of ways. We can have granularity for the kind of qualities that John was referencing earlier, like the caring qualities or compassionate qualities that are the ground of our being. The meditations can help us to become more attuned to that. But then also what you referenced, granularity can also be applied to different levels of suffering. And if we become more attuned to different kinds of suffering and different levels of suffering, it can provide us with a potential avenue into liberation from all of that suffering, because it's a process of becoming more aware, more like kind of a high definitional understanding of it. So I heard one person describe granularity as like moving from like, the old video game console systems that have very little pixelation to more current kinds of video game consoles where it's very sophisticated, fine image. That's like high granularity. So within Buddhism, right, there's a great granularity on suffering in terms of the first level of suffering being like physical and obvious forms of pain, illness, sickness, dying as suffering of suffering. And then a second level of suffering, which would be, I think, is suffering of change. Is that right, John?
Yeah.
Yep.
Suffering of change. So even when we're in a sort of relatively happy moment, like say hanging out with friends and kind of palling around and having a good time, if we're attached or identified with those experiences, we're ultimately going to be experiencing some change to those positive conditions that could be setting us up for difficulty.
It's just a drag to have good stuff end.
Yeah.
Everybody don't like that.
And then the third level being suffering of ego conditioning or conditioning and sort of the suffering that comes from subtle clinging to a sense of me and myself and me moving around in the world. I sometimes share a story when teaching these ideas.
Yeah.
Where I'm a professor at a university and I teach a lot of courses, and sometimes I'll take a break in between my classes to go get a coffee at the coffee shop. And even as I'm walking down the sidewalk, I can feel a kind of stress in my chest, like a subtle urgency to get to the coffee shop a little bit faster. Even if I'm not experiencing negative emotion in that moment, there's a kind of, I can feel a little pressure to get to the coffee shop faster so I can get back to my office faster to get more work done. And it's almost like I wouldn't be able to articulate it, but there's a kind of just visceral, kind of subtle experience in the chest. And I think that speaks to this very subtle form of ego conditioning of there's a me that needs to get somewhere and get back to accomplish some kind of agenda or goal. But if we become aware of these very subtle states, then include those kinds of subtle states in a space of embodied compassion and warmth and wisdom, then we're no longer so tightly identified with them, and we're no longer controlled by them. And we can then also have greater empathy for others who are also conditioned by those states.
Right. That's such a huge thing when we go back to speaking about there is no other, that concept. We have to have that kind of deep knowledge of ourselves, and then we can look at somebody else and go, they are suffering the same way I am. That is a big deal. So
that comes back to practices.
Yep. It all comes back to practice, right?
What we need to become aware in the way that Paul referred to at the very end of what he just said, to become this kind of environment of warmth, healing, care toward all of our states of mind and reactions, so that they can begin to heal. And from there, we can also sense others from that deeper place, become more of a healing environment for them, sense how they're caught up like I have been. For that to happen, I mean, it sounds really good, even as I was listening to Paul. Wow, that's really fantastic. But being inspired by hearing about it and believing in it, it won't be enough. It requires clear practices that are very doable, and that whoever is taking up the practice can really learn to do those practices in a way they can begin to sense more and more. It's actually taking them in that direction, which is a gradual process, but the sense of, oh, this is really happening. And that inspiration then further empowers practice. But it needs to be clear practices that we know how to do, and we're slowly gaining more and more confidence in. It won't come just by believing better things.
Yeah. Or you get so sick of yourself because you become much more mindful if you do a little bit of work, and mindfulness enters into your life, and you really can see the motivations and self-interests that is going on a moment-to-moment basis. And you get a little bit more sick of that, and that inspires practice, inspires one to do something. Because, this is very, very gross unhappiness if you just sit and, you do not act on what you know so well through these experiences.
But then you need to look for practices that really speak to you.
Yeah, exactly.
You need to look for them and find them, and then you can take them up, the ones that really connect to you.
Yeah, exactly. And everybody has a different penchant to do one thing or another. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. They all lead to the same place, absolutely. It's funny, when you talk about creating an environment from which other people can dip into that pond, so to speak. This is, again, exactly Ram Dass would tell people. All we need, he wouldn't say it like that, but creating an environment where you are comfortable with the deepest part of yourself, and it's an environment where people can feel completely comfortable and safe. And that is a great thing, but that can only happen once you create that environment within yourself, right? So, yeah. And love, of course, which is always be something very important. I'm just reminded, you know who Sharon Salzberg is, I'm supposing. Sharon's a good friend. Yeah. We had a retreat once. We were in Maui, actually, and she started talking about love and compassion and wisdom. And she said, well, love is a difficult word now. You know, people, you say love and, you know, people think you're weak. And she went on from there about the way in which we describe something that is actually the most powerful force in the universe. Neem Karoli Baba used to say, love is more powerful than electricity. And that's and you speak to it in the book, for sure. And maybe say a couple of words about the importance. I mean, because let me just say, sometimes, especially Tibetan Buddhism has such crystal clarity, Vajra cutting through clarity. This is again something Ram Dass used to say about people getting caught in their minds because of the intellectual power of the Buddhist perspective. Notwithstanding, of course, practice takes you out of that duality. But his whole thing, when the last number of years of his life, teaching-wise, was around loving awareness. That moving ourselves out of the head story that we tell ourselves in thoughts and into the center of our being, and, you know, becoming loving awareness, then we are not just enmeshed in this judging mind. Yeah, just a little bit about love as we end this podcast.
Well, I'll just say something briefly, and then maybe Paul could say something about, I like that expression, loving awareness, a lot, because there are some traditions where there's a tendency to separate love on the one hand and something else called insight or wisdom on the other.
Yeah.
And that actually doesn't make sense to me in terms of the fuller depth of any of these traditions, that love is one of the innate qualities in the depth of our being. And as we become, first of all, learn to become more receptive to the qualities of that depth, the primary quality actually is love, and the kind of wisdom that informs and supports love. So love requires a kind of wisdom or discernment. It's not just some lovey-dovey thing separate from that. In order to love, we have to see well enough what it is that we hold in love. If we see well enough what and who anyone is from this perspective, then we love them. And if we don't love them, if we're not holding them in love, it means we're not seeing them very well. That's the kind of radical, basic message of these various traditions, but it's central within Tibetan Buddhism. Yeah. So love and wisdom are not just separate things, but there is no authentic, really deeply grounded love unless it's actually an expression of wisdom that's seeing better than what holds back our love or care. And similarly, as we settle into more of the simplicity and directness of wisdom, or of simple, open awareness, kind of all pervasive awareness and openness, lucidity, simplicity, which is kind of the deep wisdom of our being, or you might say of our true self. As we settle into that or reunify with that more and more, then the innate capacities of love and compassion that are that are already built into that are freed up actually to come out much more freely. So in this way, love and wisdom are synergistic if we cultivate them distinctly, but ultimately they're coming from ground in which they're undivided. And as we catch on to them more and more, at least in theory, in these traditions, certainly in Tibetan Buddhism, we experience them and learn to embody them as absolutely undivided. Love is the expression of wisdom, and wisdom is the very essence of love, and what love is expressing.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Paul,
Yeah.
closing.
I'll add a few things, a couple comments there to what John was describing. So one of the early insights in psychology and attachment theory that led to attachment theory was recognizing that humans need more than just physical safety and physical nurturing. They also need emotional connection and emotional support and bonding. And that was something that human infants would seek out and develop strategies to maintain some proximity to sources of care or love, you could say. So it's a sort of basic human need. And another thing that we've landed on in terms of the parallels of these Buddhist perspectives on love and wisdom and how love from an attachment theory perspective supports us is that when we feel a sense of connection with some kind of external source, so we've talked about a lot of examples in this conversation that could be a caregiver or parent or family member. There's these examples of these exemplars of teachers who embody wisdom and sort of deep healing or holding environment. When we connect with something that gives us that sense of safety and support, then we are also more comfortable with uncertainty, more tolerant, more patient, more courageous, more willing to take risks. These are all things that have been demonstrated in scientific studies. But I think it speaks directly to what John was just saying, that there's a synergy between love and wisdom. When we feel that sense of deep safety, we can let go.
Yeah.
And then there's freedom.
Yeah. Perfectly said. One last thing. You guys put a quote from Bell Hooks in the book that really caught me. Cultivating the mind of love is so crucial. When love is the ground of our being, a love ethic shapes our participation in politics. To work for peace and justice, we begin with the individual practice of love, because it is there that we can experience firsthand love's transformative power. That's a great thing from her, huh? Well, thank you, both of you, for being here and for putting this very deep book together that can be useful out there, everybody. You don't have to be a Buddhist necessarily, but it does help to want to change. That's the only ingredient you need. You don't want to keep walking around shouting epithets at the television, at the news, or whatever, online. So, again, thank you for this, both Paul and John.
Thank you.
And we will, in the show notes, I'm sure they're going to put a link to the book so people can easily get it, and link to you guys' work, I'm sure, websites and all that. And so this is Mindrolling on the Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com, and we have many, many people, presenters, teachers that both of you guys, I'm sure, are very familiar with, aside from Ram Dass. Krishnamurti and Alan Watts are part of the network. And Jack Cornfield, lots of great, great people. So take advantage of it, everyone. And we shall see you next week on Mindrolling. Bye-bye.